Welcome, those of you who are here. We're at 6:30 now. We are going to go ahead and get started here on time. I do expect a few more people to be filtering in as we go. So you might hear me welcome somebody and get them kind of introduced to how we're going to do this. But for those of you who are here, I see Katie and Brooke, David, Casey, Mandy, welcome. As I mentioned earlier, there's a couple ways you can ask questions during this. You can raise your hand and I'll unmute your mic so you can speak to me. You can ask questions that way. Another way you can ask questions is by entering them into the chat box, which you should see. So the chat box, you can just type in a question. You don't need to wait for me to stop talking to ask any of your questions, so feel free to jump in whenever. I am going to go through, I have a little presentation for you, and we'll talk about a few different things on each slide, and then I'll leave time for any questions on the material we cover. At the end, I'm going to have time for general questions, so all of your separation anxiety related questions. So this is our Separation Anxiety Ask the Trainer webinar. I am Maihofer. I'm so glad to have you here with me. Separation anxiety is a subject that is near and dear to my heart because my dog suffers from separation anxiety. So I have a, well, she's probably 8 to 10-year-old German Shepherd. I got her 11 months ago, and she presented right away with separation anxiety related distress. So the first few times I left her, I started to see destruction in my house. She would defecate and urinate. She tore a hole through one of my walls, tore all the molding off. She ripped down some blinds. I'd come home and find blood. And it was pretty serious. So we pretty much immediately started with a regimen of management training. We talked to our vet and got her on some medication because she was injuring herself and because separation anxiety is a welfare concern. So I wanted to make sure that we took all the steps we could for her. So we have had quite a bit of success, and I want to share that with you, and I want to help you get on track to be successful with your dogs as well. So as we go through, I'll be answering both from a scientific standpoint as well as from my own personal experiences with this. I know separation anxiety can be a very difficult behavior for a lot of people to tackle because it happens when we are not home. So at any point, if you are struggling or if you're struggling with one of the things that I've mentioned and have questions, please jump in and ask. Okay, so what is separation anxiety and does my dog have it? Separation anxiety is a panic disorder. So dogs who are experiencing this are not acting out because they're angry we left. They are actually experiencing a high level of distress and panic. The behaviors they present are symptoms of that emotional response. This disorder is characterized by distress that's present when the person is not there. So your dog shows signs of anxiety such as destructive behavior, vocalizations, inappropriate urination or defecation. We'll sometimes see pacing and panting and drooling. There's lots of different symptoms of this. These are just some. So these symptoms would be present when they are alone or when they are separated from their person or persons. Now, one of the tricky things with separation anxiety, like I mentioned, is that it happens while you are gone. So the only way we can really determine whether or not a dog has separation anxiety is by getting them on camera. So you could use the camera of a tablet or a phone or a computer for an initial diagnostic. You can leave your dog for a short period of time, getting them on camera to see what their behaviors are. I also highly recommend webcams. So I have my own, it's a 10-Visti webcam that I have mounted. It's not in this room, unfortunately, so I can't show you right now, but I have it mounted so that it can see all of the doorways in my house. Some houses you would require multiple cameras to get eyes on the different entry points. I focus on those entry and exit points because that is often where our separation anxiety dogs are. most of the destruction that they cause will be towards things like doorways, door frames, the ground right by the door. We'll also see some destruction by windows or other kinds of exit points. I know one of our trainers on our team has a dog who tried to dig through the electrical outlet. So there was a little, you know, the electrical outlet has little holes. She tried to go through that point to leave the room or the house, which we've never left through an electrical outlet. So why she chose that, we're not sure. But this tends to be escape behavior that we're seeing, which causes all the destruction. Some dogs will also be destructive towards items that the human maybe has touched before they left. So I'll see a lot of dogs who chew up remotes. If you have a TV and you turn it off right before you go, the remote tends to still have your scent on it. At least this is the theory behind why dogs will go for those things. Usually it is items that smell like the human. So that's kind of a brief overview of what separation anxiety is and how we determine whether or not a dog has it. So does anyone have any questions on what separation anxiety is? There are many different types, which I can cover if you're interested. There's also a lot of other symptoms we might see. So you can feel free to ask questions by raising your hand or typing into the chat box. I'm going to give us just a few minutes now for any questions you might have, and then we'll move on to our next slide. Also, hi Yvonne, thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, there are a few different kinds of separation anxiety. So separation anxiety itself is a clinical term. We use it as trainers to kind of cover all separation-related distress behaviors. But separation anxiety specifically is actually classified as anxiety when separated from a specific person. So that is the clinical version of separation anxiety. There is also isolation distress, which is what is more commonly seen. So isolation distress is where the dog is anxious and upset and showing distress behaviors when completely alone. We will also see confinement anxiety. So dogs who, when put in a room or in a crate, show distress, but if they are loose in the house, we see less distress from them. So those are a few different kinds of anxiety disorders that are all typically referred to as separation anxiety. I'm going to move to the next slide, but if you have any questions on what separation anxiety is or how we diagnose it, please feel free to ask those questions still. So here we're going to talk about risk factors. So what leads a dog to develop separation anxiety? Now, there is some argument in the scientific literature as to whether or not these risk factors are legitimate. It is really hard to determine what exactly is causing this behavior disorder, this panic disorder. But one of the things that has been found is that early life experiences can play a large role in how the dog handles stress or separation as they get older. So one of the things the literature has pointed to is inadequate maternal care can lead to heightened anxiety behaviors in adult dogs. So for example, if a mother is very distant or not caring for her puppies, then those puppies are at a higher likelihood of developing anxiety disorders, including separation anxiety. Here we have a question, it looked like. I'm sorry, if you raised your hand, it went back down, so feel free to raise your hand again. So that lack of maternal care or insufficient maternal care is associated with heightened anxiety in dogs. Now, there have also been some studies that show there might be a genetic component to anxiety. So separation anxiety specifically has been linked to certain mutations on genes in dogs. There have been multiple studies that point to a couple of different genes associated with this. So a lot of what we are seeing can be a genetic predisposition. So the dogs who show separation anxiety, this can occur based on no fault of the owner, no traumatic experiences, this can be a genetic thing. And more research is needed to really pinpoint that genetic cause. But the more we research it, the more we find that these anxiety behaviors can be linked to the dog's genes. Now, other risk factors, things that can put dogs at risk of developing separation anxiety, is rehoming or time spent in the shelter. Changing homes can lead to separation anxiety behaviors because the dog's life is turned upside down. They had a person that they were close to, and that person is then gone. This can cause an increase in separation-related distress behaviors. Changes in household routine, or in whom is present in the household. So for example, if there was somebody in the household for a long time and then they leave, in cases such as divorce or a breakup, or we had a roommate who then moves out, this can trigger the onset of separation anxiety. It's not necessarily, again, a cause, but it can trigger the start of these behaviors. And traumatic events when alone can also cause this. So there's one case study that I read through that described a dog who was kept in the bathroom when the owner left. The dog was locked inside the bathroom, and a pipe burst, and the bathroom filled with hot water. So the poor dog was stuck in the bathroom with hot water for about 8 hours. After that event, that dog showed separation-related distress when the owner left. So separation anxiety behaviors. I can only imagine what it would have felt like to be trapped in a bathroom that was full of water for 8 hours. So I think that is completely fair. This would be separation anxiety that is presenting more like a post-traumatic stress disorder. So those traumatic events can trigger this separation distress. And so we can consider that. If a dog is in a crate, for example, and there are bees or wasps present in the room and they're getting stung, this can lead to separation anxiety as well, because the dog can make the association that when you are present, it is safe, but when you leave, they're at risk of being stung. There are also quite a few studies that have shown that separation anxiety might be more common in male dogs. Some studies do not show that, so it is up for debate whether or not this is true. But some studies have shown as many as 3 times the separation anxiety in male dogs than in females. And separation anxiety tends to be comorbid with sound phobias or thunder phobias. So comorbid means it occurs at the same time. So dogs who have sound phobias can have separation anxiety. And some studies show as many as 22.5% of the dogs with sound phobias have separation anxiety. So if your dog is sensitive to noises or thunderstorms, it's worth it to check into whether or not they are experiencing separation anxiety. So another thing, as we think about these traumatic events that can trigger separation anxiety, a thunderstorm while you're gone can be a traumatic event for a dog who has a thunderstorm phobia. So you might see a dog with a thunderstorm phobia start to present separation anxiety after a time where they're left alone during a thunderstorm. Now, although we see 22.5% in one study, about 20% in some others, of dogs with these sound phobias presenting separation anxiety, studies have shown that almost 50% of the dogs with separation anxiety also have sound phobias. So as we're moving forward and thinking about how we treat separation anxiety in our dogs, we consider the sounds that they might be hearing. Having your dog in a place where there's the sounds of construction outside, or it's very, very loud in the room, can actually make it harder for the dog to overcome this separation anxiety. So now feel free to ask any questions you have on risk factors associated with separation anxiety. I highlighted here some of the more commonly thought to occur risk factors, so ones that the research shows more evidence for. As I mentioned, there is conflict within the research, so this is not always replicable between studies. All dogs are a little bit different, so depending on their sample size, their participants, the dogs can demonstrate different things. We do need more studies to really pinpoint exactly what is the cause of separation anxiety. Can a dog's sibling influence another dog having separation anxiety? Kelly, that's a great question. So there's a few ways that I think about this. There is something called sibling syndrome that it is not empirically studied, but it is of common belief among trainers that two dogs who are raised together, two young puppies, usually from the same litter, but not necessarily, can have greater risk of anxiety behaviors, especially one dog or the other. The siblings, as they grow up together, tend to rely on each other. So those dogs can, they will speak each other's language better than they speak the human's language. And being separated from their sibling can cause great distress in one or the other. Now, if one dog has separation anxiety and the other dog is introduced to that household, there is some social learning that occurs between two dogs. It is possible for one dog to see, oh, you are distressed, I should probably be distressed now. But I do not believe that there is any empirical evidence of this. Okay, calling them siblings but not from the same litter. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. So in the case of two dogs unrelated in the household, one with separation anxiety, the other new to the household perhaps, there is some social learning, as I said, so it could be possible. I have not seen this in the research though, so from a scientific standpoint, I don't know. But with social learning, we do see dogs who see their sibling accept other people and then they accept other people. Again, sibling being used in a loose way. And so if the younger dog or the new dog is seeing the other dog under stress every time the owner leaves, they could pick up on this as a stressful situation. I would say, I think that's possible based on what we know on social learning. I can't say for sure though, because again, I don't have any scientific research to back that up. Good question though. I'll let you know if I see anything though. And Kelly, I'm gonna look into your question more. I love when I get one that's, that I'm not certain of. I'll see if there's anything on there. All right, we're gonna go on to our next slide, but if you come up with questions on risk factors or causes, please feel free to ask. Management. So managing separation anxiety is tricky, but very important. So if you're looking to help your dog with separation anxiety, one of the first things we wanna do is avoid leaving them alone for longer than they're comfortable. Now this can be tricky. Any reduction in being alone while you're training can help. Now, some trainers will actually only work with people who only have their dog alone during training. So their dog is with someone at all other times so that they are not experiencing this distress. The reason behind that is because every time the dog feels the distress of being alone, it's confirming in their mind that this is a scary thing. They're having a panic attack. So they are learning over and over again that you leaving is something to be concerned about. They are having a bad experience, even if nothing bad is actively happening to them. So as much as we can, it's good to keep our dog from having those experiences. Some ways to do this are to hire dog sitters, or if you're gone for a short period of time, dog walkers. For social dogs, daycare can be a good option for our separation anxiety dogs so that they aren't left alone. And whenever possible, bringing them along can help. So for my scenario over here, my dog has a dog sitter when I go to work. So I've reached out to friends and found friends who can work from home or whose schedules are opposite of mine. So they come and they stay with my dog when I'm gone. That way, she is not experiencing the panic that she experiences when she is alone. Now, it can get tricky when we have clinical separation anxiety, where the dog's anxiety is linked to just one person leaving. And my dog is one of those cases. So when we first started out, she was still experiencing her distress. So I'm going to talk a bit with you in the later slides about how we treated that, even though she did have to go into this state of panic. Now, bringing them along is my favorite thing, my preferred method. Let's just keep the dog with us at all times, but it's not always possible. I tend to use the bring them along method for things like when I go grocery shopping. I taught my dog how to stay in the car. I keep the car running with the heat on or with the air on during the more hot or cold months. During the times where the weather is sort of like it is right now, 50 or 40 degrees, that's sort of our wonderful time for having dogs in the car. Now, it is important to check city ordinances to make sure that it is legal in your area to keep an animal in the vehicle. And of course, we want to make sure that we're doing this safely. So we don't want to have the dog in the car, in the sun, in the 70-degree weather even, because that car can become very hot. If you're leaving your dog in the car for any period of time, we want to make sure it's at a very good temperature. So my car is running and my air is on if the temperature is higher than 55 or 60 degrees out. Now, as we're managing this, sometimes we do have to leave our dogs alone. So real life can get in the way. And when that happens, we want to have a good plan so that their distress is as low as possible. So a really important thing is to make sure that our dogs are getting enough physical exercise and mental enrichment. Now, there have been some studies that show that anxiety can be linked to lack of physical exercise. So making sure our dogs are getting out and getting at least 30 minutes of physical exercise a day, especially if we can do this before we have to leave them so that they're nice and tired when we go, the likelihood of sleep is going to be a lot higher. So when exercising our dogs, I try to do this at least 30 minutes prior to leaving. So we complete the exercise 30 minutes prior to leaving. That way, any of that adrenaline or excitement that your dog was experiencing when exercising has left their system before we actually walk out the door. Now, mental enrichment is a great thing to do before you leave, but can also be taken advantage of while you are gone. Mental enrichment is anything that works your dog's brain. And I'll have a long list of different things you can do a little later on. But things like a stuffed Kong can be really helpful to give your dog something to do when you do have to leave them. Now, if we do have to go, it's really important to make it clear to your dog when you are leaving. So it used to be thought that the best thing we can do is keep it kind of random so your dog doesn't associate any of these leaving procedures, getting ready to go, and then leaving with going. But one of the things that research has showed recently is that predictability can actually lessen the dog's anxiety. So for our dogs with separation anxiety, if they don't know when we're going to leave, they're going to always be watching and waiting for it. So we get dogs who follow us around, keep track of what we're doing. They're really looking for any signs that we're going to go. This can lead to heightened general anxiety. So one thing we can do is provide indicator cues. So our dog knows exactly when we're leaving the house. So for example, with my dog, I'll tell her, I'm sorry, I have to go to work. And because my dog is a little hard of hearing, I have it associated with some body language as well. I put my palms out and down. I tilt my head. I'm sorry, I have to go to work. I do this before I put on my coat, before I grab my purse, before I fill up my water bottle and stick it in my bag. I say this before any of the things that predict me leaving so that she knows before those things happen that I'm going to be walking out the door. This way, she doesn't have to keep an eye on me all day long, wondering when I'm going to go. Now, having routine in place so your days are relatively predictable can also help. But these indicator cues make it so that they don't have to look for those signs because they don't actually have clocks typically. They do have a decent sense of time. They can sense the sun moving through the sky, all these different things. But having a very clear indicator of when you're leaving can help relieve some of that anxious anticipation. Now, I also will use indicator cues for other things. So I mentioned the dogs who follow us from room to room. That was my girl when I first got her. So when I picked her up, in the first few days, if I would get up and move to go to another room, she would jump up and knock over a table and just push past everything in order to get in contact with my leg and follow me. And now that was distressing for all of us because it spilled a few drinks, it knocked over my computer at one point, and my dog was very clearly in distress. So I also use indicator cues to let the dog know when I'm going to move into a different space. So this can feel a little silly sometimes when you're alone in a room and you say, okay, I'm going to the kitchen, and then get up and go in the kitchen. But the difference it can make in your dog is huge. So my dog went from knocking things over to lifting her head and looking at me, seeing that, yes, I did go in the kitchen, and then putting her head back down and going back to sleep. So these indicator cues can help reduce that anxiety of where are you going? Are you going to go out? Is this the moment where you leave me? All of it can help reduce that anxious anticipation that we see in our dogs. Now, if I'm leaving the house, like I said, I give my indicator cue so she knows this is when I'm going. But I will have a separate indicator cue for training. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when I go over how we train separation anxiety. But for this indicator cue, I want that to be the first thing that tips my dog off that I'm leaving. And then I want to make sure that my dog is going to be staying in a safe space for them. So for some dogs, this is a closed off room. For some dogs, they're more comfortable with free reign of the house if they have some level of anxiety, confinement anxiety. Now, when we're thinking about a safe room, this room should be dog proofed. For our dogs who tend to destroy things when we're gone, it's really important to have any dangerous items picked up and removed from that room or removed from dog's reach. I learned this pretty quickly with my girl because I had a lamp plugged in the room she was in, and she did chew through that cord while I was gone, a behavior I've never seen while I'm home. So making sure that we don't have any dangerous items, cords, breakable glass items, windows are not at an area where they could reach because some dogs will try and escape through the window, can be very helpful and important. Now, speaking of windows, some dogs are distressed when they see things out the window. So if your dog can see you leave through the window, or if your dog is seeing other dogs or people out the window, it can help to put up window film on those windows so there is less stimulus for them while they're gone. Our goal for our dogs when they're in their safe space is for them to be able to rest, work on some enrichment and puzzles, take naps, drink some water, and spend the day in a calm manner without getting too excited or aroused by different things outside. Some people will actually have the lights off and blackout curtains down. This can help promote sleep as well. So having this dog safe area is very important when we leave. And I also think if the dog is destructive, it's important to have it be a space that you are not going to be really upset about destruction in. So for example, it's not going to be the nicest room in my house. It'll often be my back room. Now, additionally, when we do have to leave our dogs, it's important to take advantage of calming aids that we have. Now, I mentioned that a lot of dogs who have separation anxiety also have sound phobias or noise phobias. So playing calming music can help reduce the intensity of external sounds. For example, if a car backfires or if there's barking nearby, having some music going or even just the TV or radio on can help reduce the peaks of noise that your dog hears. I usually think about a kitchen in this when I'm thinking about sounds. So a really loud, bustling kitchen, if somebody drops a pan, you may or may not notice. But if it's a silent kitchen and somebody drops a pan, that can be incredibly startling. So dampening the sound a little bit, making it so that any noise they hear is just part of a series of noises can really help for a lot of our sound-sensitive dogs. Now, there is music that is specifically formulated for dogs. There's Through a Dog's Ear, which you can purchase in a CD, or there's even a little speaker you can get of it. That music is specifically made to help dogs feel calmer. Tends to be like middle tones, ambient sounds, as opposed to higher pitched pop music or really bassy rock or metal. There is also a YouTube station called Relax My Dog that has music that's specifically formulated for dogs with separation anxiety. Kira just mentioned she loves the iCalm. iCalm is excellent. It plays some really nice calming music for dogs. I actually enjoy the music too. It's soothing. The Relax My Dog YouTube station has some nice soothing music. They even have like holiday music that's formulated in the same way to be soothing to dogs. And that one is free, which is nice. It does say that it'll solve your dog's separation anxiety. That tends not to be true, but it can help for sure. Now, when I'm playing music, I try not to only play it when the dog is alone. Oh, Mandy mentioned that Through a Dog's Ear is free on Alexa as well. That's awesome. That's really great. I didn't know that. I will tell my friends who have Alexa. Now, I like to play that music at times when I'm home as well, so the dog does not associate the music with you just being gone. So I'll spend time with the dog in their safe room, relaxing, snuggling with them, playing with them, with this music on in the background. That way, the only thing that changes when I'm gone is really that I'm not there. Another thing you can try is diffusing lavender scent in the air. So lavender has been associated with calm in dogs. So there are studies that show that this can reduce cortisol levels, which is one of the stress hormones that's often measured in studies. So I do have a lavender diffuser myself. I use it for myself because I find it very soothing. My dog also tends to sleep a little bit more when it gets going. Now for, let's see, Alexa has puppy jams. Oh, that will set the music to your dog's mood. Ah, that's so cute. Puppy Jams is an adorable name. Does it have like exciting music for exciting moods for the dog? Because I just think that's adorable. For separation anxiety, we tend to want calming tones. So if there's a plucky dog music that's for kind of amping them up, that's not really what we want when our dog is alone. Now, there are some over-the-counter kinds of calming aids. I would recommend talking to your veterinarian before giving your dog any sort of natural remedies or Western medication. So if we do have to leave our dog with separation anxiety home alone, it is a very good idea to discuss this with your veterinarian, and especially with a veterinarian who specializes in behavior. So because separation anxiety is a panic disorder, it is a serious welfare concern. The stress from being separated can cause your dog to actually live a shorter life. Stress has been associated with earlier deaths. So I don't wait for the last resort to talk to the vet about this disorder. I want the vet to know right away, and they would make decisions about any sort of medications. There are daily or as needed medications your dog can take that have been shown in studies to help reduce separation anxiety. My dog was started on some medication right away, and it made a huge difference in her comfort level when she was alone. So I don't think of this as a last resort with separation anxiety. I think of this as an important step. If we're able to keep the dog from being alone at all times, then medication might not be necessary. A lot of trainers have success never leaving their dog alone, but medication can help if we do need to leave the dog. So there's a question here, how long would they have to be medicated for? That is a really good question, and one that the vet would be able to answer better. So for some dogs, medication would be lifelong. That would happen if the dog is struggling with other generalized anxiety, or if we're not able to actively train the behavior. For some dogs, It might only be necessary until they learn how to be comfortable alone, but it does depend on the individual. So with medication, I always think of it as going hand in hand with behavioral training. I think of it a lot like with a human. If a human starts a psychiatric medication, it's really important for them to also be in therapy so that they're working on what they're going through. So for dogs, we think of training and medication as hand in hand. Now, if the dog is able to go on the medication, go through training, and feel really comfortable on their own, we see relaxed behavior, eating food, no signs of stress, it would be up to the veterinarian as to whether or not that dog could come down from the medication. And again, we'd kind of be looking at how the dog does at each stage as well. So if we start to wean the dog off the medication, but find that they're starting to struggle again, that medication might be making all the difference for them. So that was a very good question. Okay, so I have here, we completely avoid leaving Pure alone. Either one of us stay home with her, daycare, or take her with us. Are you saying that is okay? I thought we were doing a disservice to her by teaching her not to be alone. Oh, absolutely, great question, Kelly. So you are not doing a disservice to your dog by making sure she's not alone right now. For our dogs with separation anxiety, being alone for longer than they are comfortable outside of a specific training program can cause increased distress and panic. So as we talk about the separation anxiety training, we will talk about how to start leaving your dog alone. Because for them to overcome separation anxiety, they do need to start practicing being alone, but we do so in a very careful, gradual, and systematic way, not systemic, so that they are not experiencing this anxiety and distress. Would daycare help my dog with her anxiety? So daycare can be really helpful for some dogs with separation anxiety. It does require both the right daycare and a dog who is really social. So for example, my dog is not super social with other dogs. She is a bit fearful of other dogs. So daycare was not an option for her. But for dogs who really enjoy other dogs' company, really like to play with dogs, dogs who are not super, super young, but might be adolescent or older puppies, young adult dogs, daycare can be an option. So when looking for daycare, I look for daycares that temperament test. I look for daycares that have cameras so I can see what's going on with my dog, and with staff who are really responsive and willing to give me lots of information about how my dog is doing. So we partner a lot with K9 to 5 in Detroit and Ferndale. They are a great option if you're looking for daycares. There are some other really good daycares around. And for our separation anxiety dogs, it can help them avoid those long times alone. So daycare is not often something I do recommend, except for in the case of separation anxiety. So I think of daycare kind of like a nightclub for dogs, where it's just like a lot of activity, really exciting, and they're actually there for a really long time often if they're there while we're at work. For our separation anxiety dogs, if the options are go to daycare or stay home alone all day, daycare can be a good option. Now, I prefer having a dog sitter come, although that can become expensive. Now, when I'm looking at dog sitters, I'm also really thoroughly vetting them to make sure the dog sitter understands my dog's anxiety and does not leave them alone. So I have a lot of friends who help me out with this. I also have a couple of dog sitters who I found on Rover, so rover.com, who I interviewed and vetted, and I gave them a really long protocol list of how to interact with my dog so they know if she gets into something, she's not in trouble. I'm just going to show her something else to do. And so they understand that she needs somebody with her at all times. They can't go run out to the store and come back because she will experience stress. In fact, my dog sitters pee with the door open, so my dog doesn't have to experience that distress with them. So really good question. As for whether it will help your dog with her anxiety, I think it's worth looking into if she likes other dogs And again, you could try a temperament test with them. Try having her go for an hour or two or a short day to see how she does. But I'm pretty careful when I pick the daycare, again, to make sure that they are paying attention to the dogs. There's a camera so I can see what's going on, and that they're willing to talk about my dog's specific behaviors. What other questions do you have about managing separation anxiety? Now, I do know some people who err to manage their dog's anxiety as opposed to train it. So they stick with their management program and keep that going. And they haven't actually gone through the training protocol, but their dog does not show distress because they are never alone. I think it is important to go through the training. So in a situation where we can't avoid leaving them alone, the dog can stand on their own 4 feet and be confident. Okay. So here is a question from Raghav. Would leaving the dog home in a thunder shirt help? Really good question. So there is not complete research on this that I found. A lot of the research that was done was financed by the thunder shirt company to say that the dog's anxiety is reduced. When going through that research, one of the things we're concerned about is the measure in reduction in anxiety. So dogs in thunder shirts seem to present less behavior. So if you put a thunder shirt on your dog and they lay down and don't do anything, the dog may or may not be feeling less anxiety. They might be feeling like they can't move. So it really will depend on how the dog responds to the shirt. So pressure is something that humans will sometimes use to help reduce anxiety. You may have heard of weighted blankets to help reduce anxiety. People will get 40, 60, 80-pound blankets that they lay across their bodies to reduce anxiety. The thunder shirt kind of works under the same ideas, where it's going to put pressure around the dog's body in order to attempt to reduce anxiety. What I would recommend doing is, if you use a thunder shirt, have your dog wear it during sessions where you're relaxing with them and cuddling with them, so that we can pair that experience with something the dog really loves and enjoys. And again, I want to make sure that the dog can do other things while wearing it, that they get up and walk around and drink water and eat food and all the other things that I would expect from a dog who's feeling good. And then I would just watch. So have the camera on them and see if it does reduce anxiety. I think it's possible that it works for some dogs, but for most of the dogs that I've seen in thunder shirts, I see reduced behavior. And reduced behavior is typically associated with not feeling great. So, for example, if I'm sick, I'm going to be laying on the couch not doing a whole lot. Whereas if I'm feeling good, I'm going to be up and moving and cleaning and doing different things around the house. That feeling bad is associated with reduced behavior. Feeling good is associated with more behavior. So David asked, what about CBD products? So this is kind of one of the hot button questions right now. I actually went to a presentation by a trainer on by a veterinary behaviorist on natural remedies for anxiety and stress. And they had a slide on CBD products, and what it said was, your veterinarian is not allowed to talk to you about CBD products, which is a really interesting thing. So there are strange laws and regulations still around CBD and hemp products. There is not a lot of research, so I cannot definitively say whether or not CBD products can work for dogs. One of the things I'm really cautious of if you are getting CBD products is to make sure that it does not contain THC, which is one of the chemicals in the marijuana plant that can be toxic to dogs. So if it is a CBD product we're trying, I want to make sure it is only CBD. Now, with CBD, I have heard anecdotal evidence of it working well for some dogs, as well as anecdotal evidence of it not doing anything for other dogs. So this is another one where my answer is sort of, it depends on the individual. I would recommend bringing it up with your vet and seeing what they do have to say about it. If you are trying CBD products, I would also make sure that those products are vetted and that there are some levels of regulation. Because that industry is so unregulated, actually very similar to dog training, it can be hit or miss with the products that you might purchase. So I would look into it and do a little bit of research before trying any of those products. My dog doesn't eat or finish any puzzle toys or Kongs or anything when I'm gone. I have it out to give him something positive when I'm gone, but I think he might be too anxious to enjoy it. He does eat everything right away when I come home, though. Yeah, this is a really common issue. And this was actually one of the ones that my dog struggled with, too. She would eat 25 or 50% of the food I left for her when I left her alone. But she would eat all of it when I was home. So for that, what I would say is one of the things you can do is practice leaving for short periods. So we're going to talk about this in the next slide, actually. I think I'll skip ahead to that so that we can sort of go through this. And I would introduce the food once the dog has started to learn that there are times when you leave and come back quickly. Oh, I see you, honey. No, my good girl. Sorry, my dog has a need. I'm going to offer her some. And give her something so that she stays occupied so we can keep going without me just ignoring her request. Can we lay down? Oh, what a good girl. There you go. My dog asks to go outside in a very specific way. She just asked. So I'm just telling her I can't do that right now. Here's something else that I would like you to do. Okay, so as for the dogs who do not eat when we're gone, anorexia is a common symptom of separation anxiety. I think you're absolutely right. It's probably too anxious to enjoy it while you're gone. So one of the things we can do is slowly introduce food into the training process as we go and help our dogs learn how to eat while we are gone. So this can be a skill that they actually have to develop. So we'll talk about this in just a second, but I want to just mention, okay, Kelly said here that they talked to their vet a week ago about CBD, and they said they cannot advise on it because it is not regulated. Yeah, that is one of the things that is really problematic with that specifically, is we just don't have any regulations right now. So I'm hopeful that maybe in the future we'll have more research and more studies, and we'll be able to see kind of what benefits our dogs might be able to gain by CBD. Okay, so let's talk about training, and let's talk about how we can start getting our dogs to eat a little bit while we're gone. So for training for separation anxiety, we want to be working at a level where our dog is not experiencing anxiety. So this is the tricky part of it. So first we need to determine what our dog's threshold is. So threshold is the point at which our dogs start to show fear or anxiety. When working with separation anxiety, it is usually the amount of time we are gone when the dog starts to present with anxiety behaviors. So for example, some dogs, you leave, they're okay for 30, 40 seconds, maybe a minute or two, and then they start to show distress. So their threshold might be 30, 40 seconds or a minute or two. Whereas some dogs, my dog included, she's right here, as she usually is, she started to show distress when I walked towards the door. So her threshold was 0 seconds, me just walking towards the door. Now, that anxiety was starting right away. So when we started training, we started working with me just moving towards the door. And the process we're actually going to use is called systematic desensitization and counter conditioning. So systematic desensitization means we start to expose the dog to the thing that causes them anxiety at levels where they are not showing that anxiety. So in the case of a dog whose anxiety starts as you move towards the door, we start with just taking one step towards the door and coming back to the dog. Now, counter conditioning is pairing the thing the dog does not like with something they do like, so they start to enjoy the thing they originally did not like. So this might look like I take a step towards the door and I toss my dog a treat. So my moving towards the door becomes associated with food. So if my dog is at a point where I leave and they can't eat, I want to take a step back in the training and first work on a point where they can still eat. So I'm walking towards the door and I throw food to the dog, they can still eat at that point. Now, another thing to keep in mind are pre-departure cues. So pre-departure cues, anything you do before you leave that your dog shows anxiety towards. So I'm wearing a coat right now. For some dogs, putting on your coat starts to kick up their anxiety. Putting on your shoes, picking up your keys. I mentioned going towards the door. With some dogs, it's the sound of the engine of your car turning on, the sound of your garage opening, the lock turning, or the key turning in the lock of your door. All of these different things can be cues to your dog that you are leaving, and those cues themselves can start the process of stress building. So with our pre-departure cues, we can add them into the training to teach our dog that these things do not predict us going for a long period of time. So for example, if I am training with the dog, I might start by getting them comfortable with me walking to the door and stepping out the door. And once they're comfortable with me walking to the door and stepping out the door, I might practice walking to the door, picking up my keys, and stepping out the door, and then coming back in. So they're going to start to learn that these things do not predict me actively leaving or going for longer than they are comfortable. This is all systematic desensitization. Now, I also want the dog to feel good about this process. So we will pair this with things the dog likes. Now, here's where we need to be careful that we are under threshold so our dog is able to eat. What we can do is make sure our dog knows we are going to be leaving. So I want them to have an indicator cue that means I am going to be leaving for a short period of time, no longer than you can handle. I'll often use, be right back. Some people say, hold down the fort. Something that means I'm going and I'll be right back. So I'll say that cue. Then I will start my process. So I might go towards the door, pick up my keys. And as I'm about to walk out the door, I'll give the dog some sort of food. So the Kong might go down at this point. Maybe they have a favorite toy that I only bring out when I leave for them to play with. A snuffle mat is what I use mostly with my dog. She loves her snuffle mat and to eat treats out of her snuffle mat. So I will say, be right back, move towards the door, grab my keys, sprinkle some really high value treats in her snuffle mat, step out the door, shut the door, wait a second, come back inside. So my departures in the beginning are going to be very, very short to make sure that the dog is staying under threshold. If we leave and the dog experiences stress, say if I started at 5 minutes, I walk out and I leave the dog for 5 minutes and then come back, but she actually starts to show distress at 3 seconds, then she is going to record that in her mind as a stressful experience. That is not going to work us towards what we want, where the dog is actually feeling more confident alone. So I really want to start with very short departures in training. The good news is, if we lay a really strong foundation, the training goes faster and faster as you move forward in the amount of time. So when we're first starting out, to help determine threshold, we like to establish a baseline. So what this means is I will do one session where I have my camera up on my dog and I leave and I'm watching the camera. So this is where a webcam really helps, something that you can tap into from Wi-Fi. Again, I'll send you some different ones that I like in an email after this. But you can tap into that webcam on your phone and watch your dog while you're gone. Now, what we're looking for are any signs of stress or anxiety. So you might notice panting or pacing or vocalizations. Your dog might just go to the door and stare at the door for a long period of time. The moment you start to see this stress, we want to come back and record the amount of time it took before our dog started to show that anxiety. So again, for example, with my dog, it was I walked towards the door and she's rushing and pushing past me. For some dogs, you can step out and be gone for 30 or 40 seconds before the dog starts to really amp up and get anxious. But we really want to get an idea of how long the dog is comfortable. So when we start training, we are working below threshold, a shorter amount of time than that baseline time we've recorded. This baseline is also going to give us an idea of the behaviors our dog does when they are stressed. So if you don't have a camera yet for your dog with separation anxiety, that's step number one. Get a camera that you can see. Oh, good question. Do you do this in the crate or out of the crate? Typically, I will do this outside of a crate. Now, for the crate, I usually will teach that as an entirely separate kind of behavior. So it's similar, but the first step is actually getting the dog comfortable enough to go into the crate by themselves. So we have I think we have a really nice article or handout on crate training. I'm going to make a note to send that over as well. Crates can be really helpful when we're potty training dogs, but for dogs with separation anxiety, they can be dangerous. So if your dog chews at the bars of the crate or claws at the bottom of the crate, they can lose teeth or lose nails on those. So when possible, I like to have the crate open and the dog in a safe room instead of in the crate. Now, there are some different kinds of crates you can purchase that can be a little bit safer, but the dogs tend to still have the same anxiety response inside of them. So most of the time, I will be doing this in the house in a safe room with a camera on them. If I'm doing the crate, then I'm going to start just the beginning steps of having the dog go into the crate comfortably with them able to leave at any point that they want. So I'll send over our crate training document as well, so that you can see kind of how we start that process. For some dogs, if we're going to have potty training accidents when we leave them, I will still err on the side of having the dog in a safer room as opposed to the crate, but have potty pads down so cleanup is nice and easy. This can be kind of a tricky one, but the crates, again, can be more dangerous for the dog than a dog-proof room, so that's how I err. Now, after we have established baseline using our camera, we're going to start that actual systematic desensitization and counter-conditioning training. So when I'm doing this, I'm starting with my really, really short departures. I walk towards the door and I touch the door, and then I toss the dog a treat. I walk towards the door and I go to close the door behind me. I leave them some treats on the ground, shut the door shortly, and then come back in. So all of the times that I'm leaving are under threshold for the dog. Now, what this often looks like is we start at 0 or 1 second departures, and then we'll start to build our duration that we're gone as the dog is comfortable. For some dogs, it can help to have them go lay down somewhere before we go. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as in future sessions where we're talking about building confidence, and also as we talk about adding in consent to this training. For a lot of dogs, what I'll do is I'll do a little food hunt for them. So again, I'm going to give my indicator cue, be right back, head towards the door. Then I will produce any food or enrichment I'm going to give the dog. Often it's a Kong or it's food tossed on the floor or in a snuffle mat. I step out of the room and I'm going to be out there for as long as the duration that I've planned, below their baseline to begin with. Usually that's just 1 to 5 seconds, and then as I expand, I'm going to vary the amount of time I'm gone for, so it's not always getting longer and longer. So as I'm starting to build my duration, the first 10 to 15 seconds, I'm very careful and I'm going just a little bit at a time. So I start 1 to 3 seconds, and I'm going to go 1 second to 5 seconds, and I'm changing how long I'm leaving so that it's not just 1, then 2, then 3, then 5 seconds. I want the dog to know this is not just going to get exponentially longer for you. Otherwise, you're going to reach a point where the dog says, this is too much. I don't like it when you leave. And we see that distress come back. Now, once we get our dog to 10 or 15 seconds, it becomes easier to make larger jumps in duration. So once the dog is comfortable being alone for 15 seconds, it's not as hard to get to 20 seconds. Whereas the first 1 to 5 seconds can be a little bit harder. And once your dog is comfortable for 20 seconds, it becomes easier to get to 30 seconds. My dog had an amazing jump from 45 seconds to 1.5 minutes, where I left her for 45 seconds, and then the next training session when we were working on it, I was toggling between 15 seconds and 40 seconds, and she was doing fantastic. So I waited until about 1.5 minutes, and she was still doing fantastic, and then I came back in. So with this separation anxiety training, it starts to snowball. But what we want to always do is come back in before our dog starts to show distress. Now, in your day-to-day training, what it's going to look like is we're just going to do a few minutes of separation anxiety training at first. So I might do 5 or 6 repetitions where the dog is being left for just a few seconds at a time and varying that time back and forth and making it so it's as random as I can possibly get. So we have a question. How do you handle it if you are in the duration and the dog does go over threshold? Ooh, good question, Mandy. I will come back right away. So if I see the dog start to go over threshold, for example, with Denora, what she would do, my dog, Denora, she would go up to the door. You can see in these pictures, she's in her safe room. And this room was not well prepared. You can see that lamp is plugged in. If I was leaving her outside of a training session, I would not have that lamp plugged in because that would be a dangerous thing for her. But if I was going and the dog is starting to go over threshold, what it would look like for Denora, she would go and she would stare at the door, and she would stare at the door for more than 3 seconds. If I notice her staring at the door for more than 3 seconds, the next thing she's going to do is she's probably going to yowl and bat at that door. So when I see that, I want to come back immediately. When I see her start to stare at the door for 3 seconds, I am returning to the room so that she knows I'm going to come back. You do not have to experience that distress. And if I am not directly behind that door, if I have moved further away in the house, I'm still going to call out to her, hey, I'm coming, honey, and I come right back. I'm also going to end my training session right there. And I'm going to record that time that it took that she went over threshold. And in our next training session, I'm going to do less. Okay, here's a question. We are at about 15 minutes for staying under threshold. I'm still confused how to build up to 20 or 30 minutes. Can you explain, please? Oh, excellent. Great question. So if your dog's at about 15 minutes and she does well, she pretty much starts to panic after the treat is gone. Ah, yes. So for some dogs, the treat is helping them cope during that time. So if the treat is the only thing keeping us from panicking, what I'm going to do is I'm going to time how long it takes them to eat the treat, and then I'm going to build really short durations past that. So I make sure I give my indicator cue first. I'll be right back. I give them their tasty treat. For 15 minutes, you're probably doing like a frozen stuffed Kong or something along those lines, or an edible chew. I'm watching the dog. As they finish up that Kong, I'm going to count in my head, or I'm going to count with a stopwatch. 1, 2, 3, 4, and come right back. So I'm building just seconds at a time past that. What's probably happening is your dog is using the treat sort of like a pacifier. So that's kind of keeping her going. And then as soon as that runs out, she's not sure what to do with herself. One thing you could try is also scattering some other treats around. So there's something more for her to do. What is going to be really good is for her to start to learn that even once the food is gone, you'll be back very shortly after, and then start to expand the duration. Now, when we're expanding the duration, again, we kind of want to toggle it around. So if we're building from 15 minutes up to 20 minutes, I might do, sometimes I'm only gone for 12 minutes. Sometimes I'm gone for 13. Sometimes I'm gone for 10 minutes and 12 minutes again, and then 14 minutes, and then 16 minutes and 8 minutes. So I'm bouncing around. I'm not just building. I hope that answered your question, Kelly. Let me know if you have anything more on that. Now, are hard chewing bones good for my dog's anxiety? Good question. Chewing can really help soothe the dog. So having something that they can chew can help reduce some anxiety. Now, with really hard bones, such as the frozen marrow bones, we want to be careful not to give them all the time because they can start to wear down the dog's teeth. But I do like to kind of give them different things that they can chew on when we're gone. For my dog, she gets a greenie whenever I leave the house. That's her kind of special thing. I also like to give her some, she has bones around that she can chew on as well. She tends not to go for those when I'm not home, though. So what she tends to go for are searching around and sniffing out and finding food, or boxes that she can tear up, which we'll talk about a little bit in the next slide, I believe. But chewing bones, especially for dogs who like to chew, can be a great way to help them soothe. Okay, would this be considered separation anxiety? Barking when I first leave if no treat activity, but no barking after the treat is finished if she is given one. Really good question. It sounds like your dog might be experiencing distress just upon you leaving. So for some dogs, it's not actually being alone that is stressful. It is you leaving that causes anxiety. So with those dogs, oftentimes, if they get a treat activity, they can start to feel better about you actively leaving. So I would do similar training where I practice leaving, give them something good, and then come back. But it can go a little bit faster if the dog is only distressed during the time where we've just left. It's definitely less of a welfare concern because the dog is not experiencing the constant anxiety. Now, I'd want to make sure, though, by having a camera on them, because sometimes barking is not the only symptom that they're displaying, but it is the only one that we hear if we're listening from outside. So I would get a camera on them to make sure that there's not pacing or other kinds of behaviors that we don't happen to hear from outdoors. But yes, we can find dogs who just don't like the process of being left. I sometimes call it like fear of abandonment. It's when you walk out and leave, they're like, oh, I wanted to go. Some trainers call it FOMO dogs, dogs who have a fear of missing out, but they aren't actually really upset being alone. But yes, the training is still very similar. Oftentimes we find once the dog is comfortable with you actively leaving, we see faster improvement from those dogs. But it is going to depend on the individual. So what I'd recommend is make sure that we don't see any anxiety outside of the time you're leaving and keep those treat dispensing activities going. Okay, so let's see. Any other questions on the training itself? One note on these photos, I have, these photos are taken at different times. So separation anxiety training, I will practice it at different times of the day. So for example, in the lower photo, you can see it's black and white. This is because it's dark out. What I found out about my dog is when it's dark out, she has more separation anxiety. So her threshold had built up to, I think about 2 minutes on the day that I took this photo in the daytime when it was light out. But when I practiced in the dark, her threshold was about 5 seconds. And so we rebuilt her comfort in the dark as well. So the time of day can also change how our dogs feel about being alone. And this top photo is actually kind of a funny one. This was not a training session. This was one morning. I woke up and my dog wasn't in my room and she hadn't come and woken me. So this was a little later than we usually got up. And I checked my camera and somehow the door had shut. So I'm not actually sure how long Janora was alone in that room, but she had not shown any signs of anxiety when I looked. So this was kind of one of my happiest moments where I was just like, oh, it's working so well. She's doing so well. Whereas previously, before we started training, if this had happened, she would have torn up the corner of that door. It looks fine in this photo because I had already replaced the molding, but she had ripped up all of the molding along this door, and the door had been scratched into. So this was my on here. So again, just as a quick summary, when we're doing the active training, we're working on gradual departures. So leaving for longer and longer times and not pushing the dog past their threshold. We want to make sure they know exactly when we go. And I'm going to use an indicator cue that is separate of the one I use if I do have to leave my dog alone for longer than they're comfortable. So I usually will say, be right back. Then I'm going to leave for a very short period of time. And I'm going to give the dog their enrichment item or treat right before I walk out that door, but after I give the indicator cue. Now, when I say that, it is important that the food is only visible or it's only sniffable to the dog after that indicator cue. So I'll prepare any sort of enrichment I'm going to leave my dog with beforehand, well beforehand, hours beforehand. A lot of people will do, like Sunday evening, they prepare a bunch of Kongs for their dog. And so when they go to leave, you say, all right, I'll be right back. And you grab whatever pre-departure cues you're going to do, maybe put your shoes on, grab the Kong out of the freezer, and set it down right as you walk out the door. That way, the food itself is not predicting your departure. This is one of the difficulties with using food in separation anxiety training protocols. We want to make sure that food is not predictive of us leaving. So for the first few times, I will typically say, be right back, step out the door and come right back. So they learn what that cue means, that I'm going to be leaving. And then I'll add in the food and the slightly later repetitions of this so that they know prior to me going out the door that I will be going out the door. So the enrichment happens once they already know I'm leaving. All right, any other questions on that training or how to build duration? Okay, do feel free to ask as we go forward as well. So here we're going to talk about adding consent, and I see that my video did not upload. Very fun. So this is a video. I'll pull it up in just a second. It's on my computer. It's funny. It says request access. This is my video. Consent is something that we are starting to add into our separation anxiety training. So this is sort of a new thing going on in this training based in studies upon children. So children who are going through something that is anxiety provoking. Some studies have shown that if we give them some level of control or self-efficacy, that they actually will find less distress for that instance. So this was a study actually done with kids getting shots. And so when they said something like, do you want me to do this now? Or would you like it in 10 seconds? The kids got to choose, okay, do it now, or let's do it in 10 seconds. And their stress levels went down significantly. So here, what we're gonna do is start to teach our dogs how to tell us, it's okay for you to go now. Now, this is done by having the dog perform a behavior, a consistent behavior, and when they perform it, we go out the door. So what I do is I'll give my indicator cue. Sorry, I have to go to work. Then my dog needs to perform a specific behavior right before I go. So with Denora, what I do is I say, sorry, I have to go to work. I toss a bunch of food on the ground. She doesn't eat it because I'm going to be leaving. I grab her greenie, and I offer that to her a few feet away. So she has to get up, move to it, and take it from my hand. This behavior she's performing, taking the treat from my hand, will then result in me going out the door. Now, for her, she usually lets me. There have been times where she has said, no, I'm not going to take that. And when she says no, I go into the other room with her, I sit down with her, and she gets some pets. And then after 2 minutes, I say, okay, I'm sorry, I have to go. And we go back in the room, and I offer her that bone again, that greenie. I've never had an occasion where she said no at that point. Other behaviors you might do are having your dog go to a specific place. So laying down on their dog bed, and you present them with a high value treat, and you go out the door. It's important that our indicator cue happens first, so the dog knows this is about you leaving. And they are making the choice to let you go at this moment or in a minute. Now, this consent behavior is done so that our dog's anxiety is lower. They know when you're leaving and they have some level of control over it. Now, we've found that the dogs that we've done this with have shown reduced anxiety behaviors with this. So for example, Janora has what's called clinical separation anxiety. It is specific to myself. So I have her stay with dog sitters every time I leave. She was destroying walls and injuring herself. Outside of our training scenarios, she is with a dog sitter at all times if I'm gone. So the dog sitter is here and I'm going to leave. And when she chooses to let me go, she has shown greatly reduced anxiety with this consent. Before we added in the consent, she would spend 2 hours panicking while I was gone. So she would jump at the door, she would yowl, she would jump at the windows, she'd pace around the house and whine. She has a strange anxiety behavior where she opens up the fridge. So I had to Velcro my fridge shut so that she wouldn't open up the fridge and steal food out of it. Only does it when anxious. And that amount of time was actually going up with her dog sitters. So it went from about 1.5 hours to about 2 hours. She was becoming more anxious while I was leaving, which is called sensitization. She was becoming more anxious. She was also showing more anxiety to my pre-departure cues. And so we started adding in this consent because unfortunately I cannot stay home with her at all times. I do have to go out to work. So we started to add in that behavior of, you take this from me and then I go. You don't take it, I'm not gonna leave right away. We'll go sit down together and we're gonna try again in a little bit. Now, as soon as we started adding that in, we started to see a reduction in the anxiety. So it went from 2 hours to, she didn't panic immediately and she only panicked for about 1.5 hours. And then she only panicked for about 1 hour, and then 45 minutes, then 30 minutes, then 15 minutes. And then there were some days where she just didn't show any anxiety. And now it's very rare for a dog sitter to report anything other than a little bit of increased panting. So as a case study, as one anecdotal point of evidence, this consent did wonders for my dog. Now, another one of our trainers has implemented this with her dog. She did this before me. This was one of the ideas that she came up with, that we worked together as a system to create. Now, this is Kate Wilson, our director of training. I have a video here. Let's see if I can pull it up. Okay. This is going to be a video of her leaving her 2 dogs, Finnegan and Della, who show separation-related distress behaviors when she goes.
I gotta go. You gotta stay here.
So here she gives her indicator cue.
Okay.
I gotta go. You stay here. That's Finnegan. You can see he's panting a little bit. She's got some tasty food she just picked up.
Gotta go. Go get ready. Okay, I'll be back.
Ah, you can't see the video. Okay, thank you. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can make this visible for you. This is the struggle with this. Here we go. All right, can you see now? Yes, okay, awesome. Thank you all for letting me know. Here we go.
I gotta go. You gotta stay here. Okay.
There we go. So that's Finnegan.
You gotta go. Go down. You gotta go. Go get ready.
There she says, I gotta go. Go get ready.
Okay, I'll be back.
That is her indicating, I'm gonna leave. You can do your behavior. He goes to his place, Bella goes to hers, and they get all these tasty treats on the ground. So she throws food all over the house for them so that they can eat this when she goes.
Okay, bye.
And then she leaves. So again, the dogs here are performing a behavior that provides consent for her to leave. Now with this, we've again seen a reduction in their anxiety behaviors while she's gone. So let me see if I can switch back over to the presentation. Awesome. Okay. So what questions do you have on this consent behavior? This is one we tend to add when leaving the dog for longer than they're going to be comfortable. And it can be added into the separation anxiety training as well. So again, I would give my indicator cue first, then the dog would perform their behavior. That behavior gives me a cue to leave. So they're gonna get their really tasty treat, any sort of enrichment I'm leaving them with, and then I walk right out the door. So we have a question, how many reps do you do a day? Really good question. This is gonna be dependent on how long your duration is. So if you are up to 3 or 4 hours, then we might only do 1 rep a day. But if your dog is doing more like 15 minutes or 20 minutes, I might do 3 reps. If the dog is working on seconds, I'm probably gonna do 5 or 6 repetitions in a day. If at any point the dog is starting to show stress, I'm gonna either reduce my duration. If they're still showing stress, I'm gonna stop for that day and do fewer reps next time. We are trying to stay under threshold, but you are exposing your dog to something that they have previously found stressful. So stress can build during the training process. If our dog is well under threshold, we should not see it become more stressful as we go. If you are seeing that, again, I'd reduce my duration and do slightly fewer reps. I essentially will try and do this once or twice a day, and I'll do that for just enough time for the dog to get in a few repetitions, but not do so many that I have now taken up most of my day. So follow-up question, how many days a week should you practice? If it's only Saturday and Sunday, is that okay? Oh, that's such a good question. The more consistently we can do this, the faster we can make progress typically, but it's absolutely okay to practice just a couple days a week if that's the only time we have available to train. So I try and do 4 or 5 days a week personally. Sometimes it only ends up being 2 or 3 days a week. It can be really helpful since this training tends to be a little bit boring. You leave your dog in a space and then you leave. You also create a reinforcement system for yourself. So I would often I do my separation anxiety training and then I get some ice cream. So by doing that separation anxiety training, I have earned my treat for the day. So that can be one way to keep ourselves motivated to practice a little bit more frequently, although I might change it up so I'm not just eating ice cream 5 or 6 days a week. Practicing 5 days a week, I think, is about the perfect amount, giving your dog an off day here or there. Some people will recommend practice every single day, but giving your dog a little bit of break can really help because your dog can actually spend a little bit of time processing what we've done so that they can actually learn a little bit while they're sleeping, while they're processing, and come back with a little bit more independence later. This is usually referred to as latent learning. So I'm moving on to the next one, but of course, if you have any other questions on that separation anxiety specific training, please let me know. So here we're talking about training for confidence and independence. So one of the first things I like to train dogs with separation anxiety is how to engage with different enrichment items. So there's all sorts of different enrichment toys for dogs. There's licky mats. Enrichment boxes are like cardboard boxes that you can stuff with treats. That your dog's job is to rip them apart or dig through some paper inside so that they can get at the treats. There's also these, the Westpaw Zogoflex Topple is similar to a Kong, but it's a little bit wider opening. And it has a few little rubber things that stick up. So you can fill that and freeze that, very similar to a Kong. Stuffed apples or sweet potatoes are great because you can core out an apple, partially cook a sweet potato and hollow that out and then fill it with wet dog food or peanut butter, and it's a fully edible treat for your dog. Ice enrichment is one of the things that I do a lot with my girl. So frozen broth in a Tupperware or an ice cube tray. Mandy, I see your question. I'm going to answer it in just a second. Treat dispensing balls are other great ones. But each of these items, your dog needs to learn how to use. So I'm not going to introduce this for the first time during separation anxiety training. I want to introduce it to the dog sometime when I'm around. And what I will do is I will put whatever enrichment item I'm giving the dog in as easy of a mode as possible. So if it's a stuffed Kong, I'm going to use something fresh and wet that the dog can easily lick out. If it's an enrichment box, I'm going to have that box open so the dog can just snuffle around inside of it and pull some treats out. If it's a licky mat, again, that's going to be fresh instead of frozen so that the dog can easily lick it out. For these Kong toys, the Kong gyro, the Kong wobbler, and treat dispensing balls, I'm going to make sure that they're pretty full. So if the dog knocks it, food is very likely to come out. Now, with those toys, if the dog engages with the toy in a way that would make food fall out, but it doesn't fall out, I will toss a treat to the dog so they know that's the movement you want to do. Now, by teaching them how to use this enrichment first, it means they aren't going to have to actively figure it out when they're experiencing some level of stress if we give it to them when we do leave them. So this is a great way to help your dog learn how to do these things so you can leave them with them. And it actually can help reduce general anxiety. So it boosts confidence because the dog is engaging with something in the environment and earning reinforcement. And then once your dog is really good at them, they can be used for things like when you have to leave your dog, so that they have something to occupy their time and to put some of their energy into. Now, before I go on to the others, I want to make sure I answer Mandy's question. So personal dog named Benny struggles with confinement anxiety. Does consent-style training with him. He does well until the food is gone and then instantly has anxiety, barking and scratching at the door. Lasts for a few minutes to half hour. He's dog aggressive and so has to have some alone time throughout the day so our other dogs can get out. How do you handle this in a household with multiple dogs? Oh, this is such a good question. So for Benny, if he has to be alone for these longer periods of time and he's showing this level of distress, the first thing I'd probably do is talk to the vet about it to make sure that we're doing everything possible, especially since it's coupled with some dog aggression. I want to make sure the vet knows about this. So if there's something medical going on, we can get to the root of it. When we have multiple different behavior issues like this, aggression coupled with anxiety, oftentimes there's some sort of underlying issue. So that's the first thing I would do. Make sure he's totally healthy and that we're doing everything we can for him medically. The next thing I do is I plan to have a whole lot of different enrichment items that I give throughout the day. So these things that I just talked about, I'd have a few different ones on hand. I'd have music playing for him, and I'd rotate the different kinds of enrichment I give him during his time on his own. I also want to make sure that he gets lots of exercise before those times where he's put away. So when he is out, if we can do things like play out in the backyard, play fetch, play with a flirt pole, which is like a giant cat toy for dogs. It has a pole with a rope on it and then a tug toy on that. Those are ways to burn quite a bit of energy before he goes back and is alone in his room. I also want to make sure that that room itself is not just associated with being alone. So spending some time in there with him, making sure that he's calm with you in there and relaxed and can work on enrichment while you're there. I love the consent that you've added in there. That's excellent, really well done. So for him, again, I'm thinking about vet visit to make sure he's okay, everything is all right medically, making sure that I have multiple forms of enrichment each day that he's practicing on alone, playing music for him so that he's not experiencing the intensity of the sounds of the other dogs, and hanging out in that room with him sometimes. So it's not just a place for you alone. It can be really, really tough when we have multiple dogs and not a lot of those kind of options for letting him out of the space. So I'm hoping this helps a bit. Okay, yeah, you don't spend too much time in the room with him. Yeah, I would absolutely try that. For my girl, when she had, so we're in a new house now, she has a little bit more free reign, but in my old house, she was kept in one room whenever she was left or whenever we were training. And so spending a lot of time in there with her helped reduce a lot of that anxiety of being alone in there. She actually started to really like the room, and she would go take naps in there even when I was in a separate room. So excellent. Yeah, let me know if it helps. Now, we are at 8 o'clock, so just so anybody who has something they have to get to, of course, you're welcome to go if you want. But we'll just cover these last couple of things. So there's 2 other games I like to do to build confidence, independence, in a dog with separation anxiety. One is Dr. Karen Overall's relaxation protocol. What this is a protocol for a down stay when there are distractions and exciting things going on. So it teaches your dog how to keep their body calm when there's exciting stuff going on, but it also has some distance added into it, so your dog learns how to stay calm as you move further away from them. And I use it by going out of sight as well. So with my dog, she practices a down stay on a bed. I increase my distance from her and then mark and come back and give food. Marking meaning telling the dog they've earned reinforcement. And I'm going to send you all a link to this protocol. So this is great because it teaches the dog that it's a great thing when you move away from them if they stay in place. And now the very last one here is counter conditioning and desensitization to any other triggers your dog might struggle with. So for example, Mandy just mentioned a dog who struggles with seeing other dogs. Helping them overcome some of that anxiety or making sure we manage it when they're alone so they aren't experiencing it can help improve your dog's confidence in general. So if we have a dog, for example, who is fearful of people they see out on the street, I want to make sure I'm managing that fear as well, avoiding having them see a lot of humans or a lot of people and then putting them away, because all of this stress is cumulative. All going to build up in the system. So a couple of quick things you can think about with other triggers. I mentioned before window film you can put up on windows. If your dog has a safe room that you leave them in, I'd make sure that there's window film up on those windows so they aren't seeing some of those external triggers. The music, again, can really help for any of our sound phobic dogs. And then I'm also going to work with them. So when you see one of your triggers, you get a tasty treat, so that those things are not adding to their stress when we're gone. If your dog has multiple triggers and separation anxiety, then it's a really good idea to talk to your vet to make sure that there's not some sort of medical underlying reason for these behaviors, and to make sure we're doing everything we can for them medically as well as with our behavior training. All right, everyone, so that's all I have for you today. If you have any other questions, please let me know. I'm going to hang on for just a few more minutes to make sure I can answer your questions. And then if there's anything extra, I'm happy to respond via email. So here again is my sweet girl, Nora, looking really happy. We were together at the park. And here's a few of the resources or references that I used. This is not all of them. I have probably like 50 or 60 research articles on separation anxiety in my library, but these are some of the big ones that were used in this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me. And again, I'm going to be sending a little follow-up email for you with some of those items that I mentioned. All right, everyone, it looks like we don't have any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of the presentation for now. Thank you so much for being here. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at K9 Turbo. I'm going to send over those resources as well as a coupon for you for some training. All right, thank you.